The story's opening scene showed a man hanging over a cage full of zombies. The lady among men mocked him, saying all his friends were now dead, and so his life was pretty useless. In his agony, Jong Xiaoyong wished he could undo what happened to his friends and blamed himself for their deaths. Yet he also wished that she could die in the most miserable way known to man, as she leaned into her pot-bellied daddy with benefits. And then he pressed a button on a remote that released Jong into the zombie-infested cage. In no time, the zombies rushed at him and one of them got him straight in his neck veins. But before he died, Jong called out to his tormentors, swearing that if he ever has a next life, the bastards would pay dearly for all they did to him. Afterwards, a moment of pitch darkness ensued and Jong suddenly found himself getting scolded by his girlfriend who wasn't happy that he hadn't included her name on the house deed despite claiming to love her. He was confused as he found himself seated on a couch in a living room, and figured that he might have reincarnated into the time before the zombie apocalypse. In his past life, Jong was deceived and swindled of his inheritance by Qi Jing. Afterwards, a global catastrophe occurred and humans were transformed into zombies, leading to a chaotic world. Luckily, Jong made friends while in the process of surviving, so they were able to build a safe zone and survive the apocalypse. However, that chameleon of a woman slid back into his life, pretending to be desperate and seeking his refuge and sympathy with her extra-large milk bags. Unknown to him, Jing had ulterior motives and was actually working with some bad guys that were out to destroy Jong. Back to his renewed life, Jing, who was Jong's current girlfriend, was demanding 400,000 bitcoins as her bride price and nothing less. By now, he already knew her for the evil conniving else she was but tried not to act impulsively, so he pushed her out the door and said he'd heard her demands. As he banged the door, Jing couldn't believe that Jong had suddenly become assertive and was no longer the simp he was supposed to be. Meanwhile, Jong found that there was only a month left until the apocalypse, so he must start preparing immediately. Suddenly, his apocalyptic cheat system was activated, and he was tasked with the mission of owning a piece of land and preparing a year's supply of provisions. Jim was surprised at this system and wondered what the mission reward point could be used for. He visited the system store and was about to purchase some items including supply boxes, but he felt his stomach rumble and remembered how in his past life, he was starving to death just to save up for Qi Jing's bride price. So he picked up his phone and decided to order Uber Eats, because the apocalypse was going to happen in a month's time and he won't be privileged with double-decker burgers anymore. His food arrived and Jong treated himself to a 3-star meal which tasted so delicious that his clothes were ice-skate. In a haste, Jong stuffed himself with every good thing on his plate, but he suddenly received a phone call from Wen Shuya, who was Jing's friend. She yelled at him for maltreating Qi Jing, because if he couldn't share his property with her, there was no point in saying he loved her. According to Wen, Qi Jing was only testing Jong, but he woefully failed, and the only way to win her back was to bring his house deed and 1 million yuan. Angrily, Jong retorted, asking who the heck that fool thought she was to test him, and that she could go to hell and choke on the devil's pitchfork. He immediately cut the call, immediately switching his mind back to his first mission, which was to own a piece of land. He was surely going to build the strongest fortress, which was not only defensible, but located near a source of water and the forest. Later he walked into a real estate agency and was met by a saleswoman who warmly asked whether he wanted to buy or sell a house. However, Jong said he wasn't there for either, but the agency's manager, Zhu, suddenly ordered her to go pick up some toilet paper. She told him she was trying to attend to a client, but he called her an idiot and showed her that Jong was a broke loser who couldn't even afford his own underwear. Right there and then, Jong cut him off and called him out for looking down on him. The dumb manager said he was surely gonna look down on dogs like Jong, but if the boy could as much as purchase a toilet, he'll live stream himself eating shit. Jong took up the challenge and promised to find the manager some steaming hot poop to binge eat. He, though, told the lady he wasn't there to rent or buy a house, but to buy a fat piece of land. The gathered crowd couldn't believe what they just heard, because lands are more expensive than the universe, and they'd never even see anyone buy one before, meaning Jong was Elon Musk's daddy. The nice lady ushered him in to take a seat, but manager Zhu claimed Jong was only there to brag and scam them when it was time to pay. She handed him some documents containing the viable pieces of land they had, but he simply decided to share his requirements with her and hoped they had something that matched. He went on to share that he preferred a land near mountains and running water with convenient transportation and large factories or buildings. She thought for a while and Zhu suggested a certain piece of land in the east that met the exact requirements Zhang gave. The lady said it wasn't a great choice because the factories over there were all unfinished projects and couldn't be sold to clients. Zhu told her to stop taking Zhang seriously because he was only there to waste their time, not to buy anything. But Zhang interrupted his dumb talk, asking if the piece of land met all his requirements. While the girl repeated the issue with the unfinished factories there, Zhang deliberated upon it, noting that the land actually met all his requirements and he could save himself some stress by placing barbed wires around it. He immediately said he'd take it and asked for the contract so he could sign it. She handed him the papers and asked if he was really sure he wanted to purchase the land despite its shortcomings. But Zhang was super sure about his decision and couldn't wait to pay, so he'd make the manager literally eat it. In no time, Zhu was holding the receipt of payment and couldn't believe that anyone would pay such a hefty sum for unfinished factories. Zhang walked up to him and said it was time for Zhu to keep his own end of the bargain since he's kept his, and he promised to send Zhu a super thanks. The onlookers were eager to watch Zhu keep to his promise, and one even promised to donate his steaming hot diarrhea on the spot. Meanwhile, Zhang's apocalypse system rewarded him with 10 points for successfully accomplishing the first mission, and he was glad he used up the bride price money to buy that land, though he now needed to find money for stockpiling supplies. Just then, Jing's zaddy, Lai Shuxing, coincidentally saw Zhang at the real estate agent and wondered what a sorry-arse loser like himself would be doing there. Later, he walked further and found some of those lifeless dudes force-feeding Zhu with their poop and asked what the hell they were doing. The next thing, he called Qi Jing to inform her that Zhang purchased a piece of land. So she was shocked because she knew he was a broke piece of crap, and so he only got that money by spending the bride price money he saved up to marry her. The entitled goat couldn't believe Zhang's guts to use what she called her money, but Lai claimed her down and told her to confront Zhang. She refused to try because she could easily visit the tabloids and wreck his reputation. Funny enough, Zhang was busy thinking about his future and how he could get money to start building on his land. But he suddenly heard a noisy bang on the door and opened it to find Qi Jing and her friend waiting outside. She yelled at him for having the guts to spend her money, and Zhang was rather confused at her stupidity. She told him she knew he used her intended bride price money to buy a piece of land, meaning the land he just purchased was now hers. Zhang took a good look at this demented biatch, brought out a bundle of hundreds, slapped it on her ugly grandma milk bags, and told her he won't spend a dime of his money on her because he knows she's having an affair with Fatso Lai Shuxing. She was silent and couldn't believe that. Zhang knew what she was up to with Shuxing, so her friend intervened between them and told Zhang to calm down because it was just a misunderstanding. He was like misunderstanding his foot, and went on to say that Qi Jing could slurp on her old sugar daddy's sugarcane for all he cared, after which he banged the door in her face. For Qi Jing, this was impossible for her to believe, because she always tried to pick the most discreet hotel rooms to service the old man. Wai Shuya comforted her for not saying a word about this affair beforehand, but Qi Jing could only come up with a dumb excuse. Anyway, her friend suggested that they return and think of a better plan for the time being. However, Wai Shuya had more evil plans up her sleeves, but you just save that for later. As for Zhang, he met up with a foreman, Lai, asking how long it'd take for him to renovate the factory on his land. However, the foreman only wanted to know who on earth Zhang had offended. Zhang told him to mind his business and tell him how long the reconstruction will take within a month. But the man said it was humanly impossible to achieve it in a month. Zhang said he wasn't up for nonsense and would hand the contract to someone else. But the man said he only meant it'll cost more. Zhang asked him to name his price, and the man said it'll cost about 20 million, and to start work, they needed a 5 million yuan deposit. Zhang said he could start and expect to get paid within the week, and that if he didn't pay up as agreed, Foreman Lai could take ownership of the land. Just then, Wai Shuya showed up at the site, cozying up to the rather confused Zhang while he tried to make sense of her actions. She acted surprised to see him, but Zhang remembered how she joined Qi Jing to scam him in his past life. He asked what the heck she was doing there, but Wai Shuya ignored the question, asking if he was planning to build a villa on his piece of land. He angrily retreated his hands from her embrace, saying whatever he did with his piece of land was none of her business. Wai Shuya was upset and pissed as heck, because on a normal day, he was such a weak, one-minute man who'd blush even at her voice, but now she couldn't even get him to look at her. As Zhang ignored her to keep tabs on his construction work, Wai was even more annoyed with him and refused to let her chance to replace Qi Jing and take over that piece of land. Back at home, Zhang was calculating what he got from pawning his house to the bank and realized that the realized amount won't suffice for anything. So he figured since the apocalypse would be occurring soon anyway, he had nothing to lose by selling his house to multiple people. But just then, he heard a knock on the door and thought it was his grandpa neighbor who was trying to purchase all the building floors. Zhang had initially refused to sell that house because he intended to use it as his matrimonial home. So the old man had resorted to using underhanded methods to frustrate his life, like taking a dump at the entrance of his home. Now, as Zhang opened the door, the old man, Grandpa Lai, yelled at him for going out clubbing. Zhang knew damn right he went early to bed, and this was just another means for Lai to frustrate him. So Zhang claimed he'd had enough and was going to sell it to the grandpa finally. Lai was above and beyond with shock and almost excitement. But Zhang said he had one condition, which was that Grandpa Lai would wait the next 6 months before the house would completely be his, and he needed to pay an upfront $5 million for Yuan to place off the mortgage for his new home. Lai was trying to hesitate for a minute, but Zhang had no time to waste with the old man and almost called off the deal. So Lai quickly agreed and asked Zhang to sign a contract with him so he wouldn't later back out of their agreement. A contract was the least of Zhang's problems, because he knew the old man would kick the bucket in a matter of a few zombies. With $5 million from Grandpa Lai and $3 million as a bank loan, Zhang was set to complete his systems' missions and receive more rewards. He immediately set out to gather a year's worth of supplies and had made significant progress. But the ignorant lunatics who didn't know they were about to be zombie meals thought he was insane and wondered why he was shopping like he'd be stuck on Mars for a decade. Anyway, Zhang had successfully completed the system's mission and gained 10 points, but that was exactly what he needed to purchase his first supply box, and he wasn't so excited to lose all his points on one box. However, he went on with it and purchased it, after which he was rewarded with a level 1 space ring which contained 500 square meters of space, and in that space, time would stand still. This gave Zhang an idea, and he found that even if he stored fresh good, with this new ring, they won't go bad. His next mission was to gather 10 years worth of supplies with a reward of 20 points. But just then, some dude showed up, asking who the hell was causing such a ruckus. He apparently recognized Zhang, who recognized him as Yang Tao, an idiotic schoolmate who hung around with bullies and became a notorious bully himself. Yang Tao warned Zhang to return the items to their spaces or face his wrath. But Zhang simply called him out for attempting to bully him, and also asked if that was how the store treated its customers. Yang Tao was surprised to find out that Zhang actually intended to purchase the items, so he demanded that Zhang pay for the items immediately or risk getting a good beating from Daddy's wand. About an hour later, Zhang's bill was calculated at over 50,000 yuan, so Yang Tao told him to pay up ASAP. Without hesitation, Zhang swiped his card and Yang Tao watched shamefully as the transaction was marked as a successful one. He decided to walk away like the shameless fool he was, but Zhang called him and asked him to apologize for being so rude to him, otherwise he'd return all the goods. Yang Tao said the brat was overstepping his boundaries, but other customers took sides with Zhang and began live streaming what was happening while demanding that Yang Tao actually apologizes to Zhang. The latter demanded that if Yang Tao complied and apologized as demanded, he'd purchase even 10 times what he bought earlier. Yang wasn't buying his story, so Zhang asked for a POS machine so he could show him his balance. He swiped his card and Yang saw about 700,000 yuan, much to his shock, so Zhang asked him to apologize and he'll actually keep buying. Yang Tao was angry and gritted his teeth in frustration, but he eventually bowed his head and apologized to Zhang, who tapped him on the head like a good old dog. However, Yang Tao asked why Zhang was buying so many stuff, and he said it wasn't his business and he was planning a big deal. Yang said it would be better for Zhang to contact wholesalers if he was really all about his big deal. And when Zhang asked for any wholesaler's contact, Yang mentioned Zhang Shengzhe, who was one of the bullies Zhang had to deal with. The moment Shengzhe met Zhang, he resorted to insulting him, saying he was just a rich kid wannabe who was broke in reality. He also insured Zhang's hoodie because it was gotten from a $1 store, and physically attacked Yang for bringing such a low-budget client fro him. However, Yang told Li that Zhang was actually a big hit, but the idiot said he was experienced in knowing rich clients just from a glance. Jim smirked and said it seemed his aura was pretty poor, which explains why he wasn't looking intimidating to a homeless illiterate who looks down on people. The merchant got upset and jacked Zhang by the collar and asked him to repeat what he just said, but Zhang wasn't even sacred to repeat the words he said, and even offered if Zhang would prefer to be called a snob. In the midst of their confrontation, Yang begged Zhang not to trigger Ji because he knows he's an illiterate, but he hates anyone calling him that. This angered Ji, who turned his attention to Yang and told him to shut his stinky hole up if he can't talk properly. He also said that if Zhang didn't purchase a carload of goods, he'll be on his knees getting hit from behind. Zhang warned him to let go of his collar, and then he asked for Ji's account details, so in a few minutes after he'd had transferred 1 million yuan, Ji was shocked to his core. On the other hand, Zhang called that an initial deposit because he wanted to purchase items worth 5 million yuan, so he asked Ji to prepare the truck already. The merchant asked Zhang what sort of goods he wanted, and he said he wanted anything edible or drinkable. He asked Zhang to follow him, but Ji really just wanted to sell his nearly expired products to Zhang. When they got there, the merchant said he'll give Zhang a 10% discount if he purchased that batch of goods, but Zhang surprised him when he insisted on being sure about the quality of the goods. He went straight to inspect one of them and concluded that only the topmost layer of goods were good, and the innermost layers contained nearly expired goods. For that, he called Ji a schemer, and the idiot was surprised that Zhang would be knowledgeable enough to escape that scam. The fool offered to give Zhang a 50% discount if he agreed to purchase all the nearly expired goods, but Zhang said he was only interested in buying high-quality goods. However, he offered a different plan for Ji's nearly expired goods, saying he'll purchase them at 50% off as Ji promised, but he'll pay him only a month later. Ji was worried that the goods will be expired by then and he won't get paid for them, but Zhang assured him that he'd mortgage his house to him. Still, Ji was surprised that Zhang knew the quality of those goods but still agreed to purchase them, so he asked who his channel was and Zhang said he was the sauce. That's because in a matter of days, even expired food would be worth a fortune. But since Ji had no idea what this gigachad was saying, Zhang told him to ignore the specifics and find a way to deliver the goods. Suddenly, Zhang received a call from an unknown number asking if he wanted to sell his house. So he concluded business with Ji, and the scene switched to Zhang receiving a 400,000 deposit from an old dude for his house, on the condition that Zhang would vacate the house in 3 months' time. He was eager to sign a contract with Zhang, and this raised suspicions on the young man's end, so he asked that grandpa why he was so desperate to move into his house. The old man said he was trying to find a house for his granddaughter who was switching to a new school, and the only house up for sale in the area was Zhang's. Zhang was moved by the man's honesty and asked if he wasn't scared that he'll switch up on him and increase the price of his house. But the old man said he had exhausted his entire family savings just to purchase that house. Anyway, Zhang assured him that he wouldn't scam him, and then he turned over a copy of the signed contract. So the happy old man was satisfied and decided to return home. Unfortunately, Zhang could tell that the old man and his granddaughter were unlikely to survive the apocalypse, so he asked him to hold on and then asked for his current address. Much later, Zhang returned to his construction site, and the foreman asked him about the second payment because the construction work had progressed up to 70% and the warehouse was sturdy. Immediately, Zhang called Ji to begin delivering the goods to his warehouse, and he gave the construction workers some really juicy bonuses while instructing them on how to store the food items. The day had finally come to an end and Zhang had successfully completed the mission of storing 10 years worth of food, so the system rewarded him with 20 points and new boxes were added. Among the boxes were a physical enhancement box, an apocalypse farmer supply, and an ability awakening box. He chose the ability awakening box and got a skill called the mind's eye, which can detect if people have hostile intentions. He equipped himself with that skill because it'll be useful most especially at the time of the apocalypse, and the next mission he was given was to get himself ready for battle by arming himself. Later that evening, Zhang visited the black market and walked past a bunch of people arguing over a bracelet, only to find out that it was Lai Shuxing who came all the way to the black market to buy a fake jade bracelet for his dumb Qi Jing. His eyes caught on some looking swords and he met the seller, asking for something hard. The man said he could get whatever he wanted and sharpen it himself, but Zhang said he needed something tougher. Somehow, the seller thought Zhang was trying to be troublesome, but Zhang quickly silenced him by crediting him 200,000 yuan to show him that he was pretty serious about buying. Immediately, the guy called his boy to watch over the stall and whispered that Zhang should follow him to a more private place where they could talk freely. At first, he showed Zhang some dumb guns for gunning down birds, but Zhang wasn't trying to be a hunter, so he rejected them. Next, the seller showed him some replica revolvers, almost as good as the real thing, and even offered to sell the bullets. However, Zhang was hardly impressed because he prepaid a huge amount, and what the guy was giving him were more like water guns. Zhang mentioned that he was giving the initial deposit as a prepayment because he wanted to buy 2 million worth of weapons. It was then the seller knew he was a cheap beta male compared to Zhang, so he went to ensure that the coast was clear, after which he told Zhang that he had come to the right person. He then told Zhang to write a list, and he'd give him an address where he could complete his transaction in 2 days' time, with cash. As they stepped out, Lai Shuxing was right outside, saying he didn't expect to see Zhang in the block market, which probably explains why he's been spending so lavishly lately and ignoring Qi Jing. He started mocking Zhang and saying trash like that, so Zhang found it a perfect opportunity to use his new mind's eye ability, with which he saw that the weapons dealer had pure intentions and Lai Shuxing had bad intentions. Anyway, he returned the old man's mockery, saying he was getting premium head jobs from Qi Jing by deceiving her with fake thrift goods, but she deserved it anyway because she was his used property. This statement angered Lai, who was ready to throw punches, but the weapons dealer stepped in asking Zhang if he knew Lai Shuxing, and when Zhang called him an enemy, the boy offered to handle Lai Shuxing for him, along with some thugs. Before he left, Zhang told him not to end the old man because he had other plans for his life, and the dude drew out his weapon, terrifying Lai Shuxing, who almost shat his pants from fear. By the time he had received a good beating from those boys, couldn't wait to have his pound of flesh on Zhang. 2 days later, Zhang had received a truckload of weapons there by completing his battle-ready mission and earning 20 points. He was rewarded with a physical enhancement potion and injected into himself, went through some pain, but ultimately got his strength increased by 40% more than an average person. He purchased another one, increased his strength to 60% more, and at that point, he had transformed into Human Torch, so all he needed was someone or something to test out his skills on. He found some metallic rods and thought them to be the perfect targets, so he punched one of them and instantly created a dent in its body, bending it to almost 90 degrees. This was impressive even for him, because even as a barehanded fighter, he was not an easy match for anyone, and he could easily get rid of the zombies. Next, he decided to store his weapons in the ring for safety, so he activated the protective power on them. Now that it was only 2 days to the first day of the apocalypse, Zhang wondered what else he needed to do, but he suddenly remembered the old man and his pitiful words, realizing that, even after getting betrayed, he still couldn't ignore the weak and unfortunate. He decided to send some essential supplies for the apocalypse, and hoped that the old man would find a way to survive long term. The next day, Zhang drove down to the old man's location and noticed how wretched the place looked. After knocking the door, he took out his supplies using his spatial space on the ring to prevent himself from having to explain anything to anyone. Soon, the old man showed up at the door and started explaining how he planned to pay his rent the following week, but he found out that it was Zhang and not the landlord. He asked what Zhang was doing there, and Zhang simply started moving the supplies and asking the old man to lend him a handle before neighbors started questioning them. In no time, Zhang had finished moving everything in and commented on how sturdy the front door was, so he called him aside to tell him something. He stated that the supplies he was giving to the old man would last him about 6 months or more if he used them wisely, but his eyes were suddenly drawn to a picture of the old man and a young girl. He instantly recognized her as Shanshan, one of the friends he made in his past life during the apocalypse. He asked the old man if his daughter's name was Meng Shanshan, and the old woman was surprised, but Zhang just asked him where she was at the moment. Gramps said she was back at school, and once the house transfer process was completed, she'd be transferred to a new school. He remembered watching her cry as she blamed herself for dooming her grandpa because he broke into her high school to rescue her, but he lost his life in the process. He was determined to help her make up for her regret in the past, so he told the old man not to move into his house anymore. This saddened the man, who thought Zhang was going back on his word and scamming him about the house, but Zhang explained that in the next 24 hours, the world will be transformed into a living hell, and neither his house nor the granddaughter's school will be important anymore. Zhang told him to follow him so he could go pick up Shanshan from school, and he'll organize better accommodation for both of them. The man was so confused and didn't understand a word he was saying, so Zhang explained that an extreme famine was about to sweep across the land. Even this wasn't so convincing to the grandpa because he wondered how there could be famine in such peaceful times. But when he saw Zhang cause all the supplies to disappear in a matter of seconds, he knew that Zhang wasn't messing around. Next, Zhang got into this god mode and shared that he possessed superpowers that enable him to see the future. And if the old man wanted to preserve his life, and his granddaughters should follow everything Zhang was saying. He asked for Shanshan's school and they quickly drove down there, and then Zhang asked if the old man knew her class. They rushed down there, but some rude bratty biatch was slapping Shanshan and hating her because the popular dude in their class liked her. Shanshan tried explaining that she didn't even want the moron in question, but her bullies kicked her in the stomach and told her to shut the hell up with her excuses. The embittered lady asked how she had the guts to reject someone as hot as that guy, and she went on to pull her hair from its roots. But just then, a voice called out to them asking what the heck they were doing, and they found Shanshan's grandpa who was running towards them, demanding that they let go of his granddaughter. However, some young demented waste of breath stepped in and called him an old fart, asking him to leave young folks to handle their matters by themselves. He intervened regardless and pushed them away, calling them mannerless runts whose parents should have used the damn rubbers when they had the chance. As he pushed through, one of the boys lifted a weapon to hit the grandpa, but his hands were suddenly stopped by Zhang, who called them out for wasting away as thugs instead of learning their ABCs. Some dudes were mocking him and thought he was Shanshan's older brother, but he surprised them when he kicked their friend into oblivion. They wondered if he was taking lessons from One Punch Man with that wonderful result, and decided it'd be better if they took him down together. That was the worst idea ever because Zhang calmly waited and planned against their attacks. As one of them landed the opening swing, Zhang dodged it and jerked him up by the collar, flipped him into the hard ground, making his eyes roll to the back. The unfortunate blonde ran with a knife, attempting to sneak an attack on Zhang from behind, but the alpha grabbed the knife and kicked his flat, deflated buns to the ground, after which he lay passed out like his partner. After watching this, that ugly sheik and her useless friend became scared and asked what he intended to do with them. Without giving them a chance to think, Zhang slapped the stupid girl and gave her the finest shade of blush she'd ever find, while he dragged her friend by the hair since she had that hair-pulling fetish. He soon pulled out a knife and placed it at her neck and before they knew it, he slit her throat because he suddenly got possessed by his inner demons. Just kidding though. The girls watched in shock as the lady fell to her knees and found that Zhang had cut off her hair, enraging her as she threatened not to let him get away with what he'd done. However, he calmly told her that she won't be in need of that long hair in the next few days to come because it'll be her letting zombie daddies feast on her long hair. He told Shanshan to get up, and in the car, she was shocked to hear that she won't be going to school because of massive famine. Now she did think her granddad had fallen for those scammers on WhatsApp for boomers, so she just hoped they hadn't scammed him of her trust fund this time around. Smiling at their back and forth, Zhang chipped in and explained that he was indeed the source of that unbelievable famine story, so Shanshan asked him who the heck he thought he was. He introduced himself and offered to role play as her older stepbrother henceforth, so she thanked him for stepping up to her bully, Sun Y and the others. She asked to confirm if there was really going to be a famine, but Zhang confessed that he only made that story up to convince her grandpa, who's probably never heard about a zombie. But there was as a matter of fact going to be an apocalypse, and to confirm his claims, Zhang urged her to check her phone for news events and videos because it was about time. Truly, she did find videos about some suspected rabies patients biting healthy people, including rumors of a foul-smelling smog. Zhang affirmed that those were signs of the apocalypse and that the next day would begin in earnest. It'd start off with a toxic smog that'd blanket selected provinces and mutate several people into zombies, while a number of those who died would also become zombies. Even though it was expected that Shanshan was young enough to know what zombies were, she found it unbelievable, so Zhang told her to fug around and find out. Soon, they were stuck in traffic, and even the emergency lanes were blocked. So Shanshan's grandpa was scared that they'd get stuck and be attacked by the zombies Zhang was talking about. However, the young lad was sure that it wasn't going to happen so soon, even though he doubted himself and predicted a small outbreak at their present location. Suddenly, a vehicle sprung out from the blue and zoomed past them into the emergency lane, but Zhang didn't let him get away with it and recovered his space. The fool called Zhang a brain rot behind wheels, and Gramps suggested that Zhang avoid the man's trouble because he looked wealthy and influential, but Zhang didn't mind sending the old fool to an early grave. An hour later, the queue started moving again, but that dude won't give up on cutting into their lane, so Zhang went rogue as well, even though Gramps wasn't exactly in support of him breaking traffic rules. However, Zhang couldn't care less because the world was going to in a couple of hours anyway. He zoomed past the other guy who placed a call to the traffic police, demanding that they provide Zhang's plate number so he could teach him a lesson. Much later they arrived at Zhang's place, which was so unbelievably large to the grandpa. But Zhang told them to overdose on sleep because they won't be resting well for the next few days. In the morning, Shanshan woke up from a refreshing sleep and Zhang told her to follow him to the fortress he built. His fort was made of reinforced concrete and has a solid steel remote-controlled gate which can only be broken into with heavy weapons. He told her that without his permission, no one else was allowed to get into the fortress besides the three of themselves, but Shanshan was worried about survivors who needed refuge, hoping they wouldn't be left to die out there. He told them to follow him and further explained that during an apocalypse, humans are largely unpredictable and will be more evil than usual, so role-playing Mother Teresa will only shorten their lifespans. They arrived at a location with a buffer zone which would serve as a temporary shelter for survivors who show up in his absence, but under no circumstance would they let anyone into the fortress until he returned. He showed them the food storage next, and before showing them the weapons he used his mind's eye, which showed that they trusted him so much. He finally showed them the weapons and asked them to ensure that they remained in control of those weapons without permitting anyone else in. The grandpa agreed to his terms, and next up, the system gave Zhang another task to find his former comrade, Zhang Kai. He was worried about this task until the system pointed a blue arrow towards where he could locate his friend, so he set out to leave. He also warned them to adhere strictly to his instructions and told the anxious Shanshan that he was going to recruit more members to join their team, and then he drove out. The scene changed to a group of guys singing in a karaoke bar, and two of them, with one of them being Zhang Kai, wanted to use the restroom. As they stepped out, Zhang Kai accidentally brushed shoulders with a lady who was obviously upset and glared at him, even after he apologized. Her boyfriend with serious anger issues just had to prove that his steroids weren't a waste of money, so he set out to hit Zhang Kai. He kicked him to the ground and Zhang Kai's nerdy friend came to check on him and even confronted the other dude for hitting his friend. But the lame dude decided to teach him a lesson for taking back. So he jerked up his collar and Zhang Kai was left with no option but plead for mercy. Just then, a barman saw the ruckus and intervened in the fight, but the tall dude shifted his attention to him and asked why he had the guts to touch him when his boss wouldn't. He told Zhang Kai and his other friend to hurry and leave, so they scurried back into the karaoke bar and shared their unfortunate incident with the wasted bastard. One of their friends asked why they backed down despite being engineering boys, so he decided he'd call their classmates to rally around and beat the MF up. However, Zhang Kai pacified him and they returned to their music. But just then, the wasted dude, his girlfriend, and some goons walked in with the beaten-up waiter, and he directed his goons to Zhang Kai and the nerdy one. Mr. Engineer, Zhang Kai's friend, said they shouldn't dare him to make a call, but one of the goons said no one permitted him to talk, so he grabbed a bottle and smashed it on his head, leaving the poor Chen Chong bleeding from his head. Meanwhile, Zhang arrived at the karaoke bar where Zhang Kai and his friends were. With Chen Chong lying on the ground, Mr. Boyfriend of the Year asked his baddie if she was happy with the result, but she pointed out that he hadn't dealt with the guy who bumped into her after all. Next, the dude directed his attention to Zhang Kai, but Chong suddenly got up and picked a broken bottle piece which he raised against his assailant. He was restrained by the other thugs and the main dude yet again smashed another bottle on his head, knocking him out on the spot. This time around, Zhang Kai and his nerdy companion rushed at the man and his goons, and they called out to their cowardly friend Lao Si to join them instead of peeing his pants like a hopeless dog. Zhang Kai engaged those useless thugs and kept calling unto his friends, but the beaten-up bartender suddenly had this villain look in his eyes and roared his way into the men, grabbed one of the thugs, and bit him on his neck. The other thug tried to intervene and save his other friend, but the rabid bartender turned to bite him instead, exactly as a rabies-infected dog would have. He also had enough strength to push the other thug to the ground and continue attacking him, but a hand suddenly showed up, picked the bartender by the neck and raised him into the air, the hand of none other than Zhang. He lifted him and smashed him against the glass wall, and then he commanded everyone to stop. Seeing his unbelievable strength, the guys wondered who the heck this kid was, and he asked Zhang Kai if he was bitten. Kai said he wasn't but wondered why, and Zhang just told him to follow him. As Zhang Kai got up to leave, the wasted dude dragged him back saying they had unfinished business. Suddenly, one of his goons, the one that got bitten by the rabid barman, coughed and complained that he was suddenly feeling dizzy, but his boss thought he had the flu. However, Zhang simply asked if he was bitten by the bartender, and he said he was. Even though Zhang didn't tell him, it was obvious that the dude was about to mutate soon. Anyway, he dragged the bartender out of the room, flung him into a secluded place and shut the door. He was lucky that the zombies hadn't gotten tutorials on how to open doors yet. He soon switched to his mode and asked Jang Kai which one of the idiots needed to be taken out, but Kai wasn't sure he knew this dude at all. The wasted dude rushed at Jong because he was being too cocky at that point, but the moment he attempted to lay a finger on him, Jong grabbed his animalistic face and smacked him into the ground. The other goon rushed at him, but one simple uppercut sent him into the ground, after which he started foaming from the mouth. His fellow companion told him to be a man and stop having seizures just from one punch, while Jong asked them to come have a taste of Daddy's fists from behind if they were doubting what he could do. Afterward, he asked Jang Chin to take his friends into the private room and wait for him. But while they left, the wasted dude and his cohorts said they were gonna leave too. Jong questioned their audacity and confronted the other dude, saying he didn't even know his own name after getting so wasted. Yet he went on and almost got rid of Jong's buddy. Next, he pushed the idiot to the ground and locked them in, leaving them stuck with their newly mutated zombie accomplice. Jong was having fun hearing the ruckus that ensued behind that door while they helplessly banged on it. So when an attendant came to ask what was up, Jong instructed him to keep that door shut and informed the police that there was a rabid flu patient in there. He hesitated for a bit, but Jong wasn't playing, so he slid the key in and locked the door. Meanwhile, Jong returned to join Jang Kai and his friends, after which he led them away from there. Meanwhile, the attendant was skeptical and wanted to reopen the door because the sounds coming from within were way too loud, but the other guy said he'd also heard about the rabid flu, so they decided to check the surveillance camera first. The moment they watched the footage, their eyes were filled with horror as they watched the rabid bartender and goons feasting on the bodies of the guy and his girlfriend. Meanwhile, the Jang told the guys to hurry because that place was no longer safe, and he drove off with them. So Jang Kai thanked him for coming to their rescue and asked him who he was. He introduced himself and said he was hired to protect them, even though they didn't need to know who his employer was. Lao Si asked if the rabid flu was real because YouTube's Karens claimed it was just another lie. But Jong asked him if what they saw in the karaoke bar was just an illusion. The nerdo asked if there was a cure, but Jong truthfully said the disaster won't go away and would only keep getting worse because it was an apocalypse after all. Just then they passed by a dude who was getting attacked by a zombie, and Jong warned the others to follow his orders if they wanted to survive, so they agreed to do so. Just then, the system alerted him that his mission was accomplished and he'd been rewarded with 20 points. He saw some new boxed cards which he intended to purchase the moment he got to the fortress, but he also had one more problem with trusting these guys with him. In his past life, Jang Kai was betrayed by one of his guys who murdered their other friends even though they treated him like a brother. Now Jong only needed to find out who the traitor among Jang Kai's friends was and fish him out. Meanwhile, Hui Jing was making her usual demands to lie, saying she was too terrified to go into the market. But suddenly, she heard a loud bang on the door and was so scared, so she checked through the peephole and found that it was just Wei Shuya. She actually came with bad news that one of the neighbors was taken away by the cops and an ambulance. She said it means the rabid flu was real, and then she asked her friend if Lai Shuxing delivered the supplies he promised. Hui Jing said he hadn't sent it yet, so her friend said that was why all men were scum and dogs. Anyway, Shuya said Hui Jing should tell Lu Shuxing that Jong had a truck of supplies and was likely to make a fortune during the pandemic. That was quite sus, so asked how she found out, but her friend lied that she had some guys trail him, who noticed that a truck was always delivering supplies to his house. At that point, Jing realized that her ex knew about the apocalypse before it happened, so her friend told her to make the call immediately, so that when Lai makes some money, he'll give them a larger cut. Meanwhile, Jong and the others arrived at the fortress, and Jang Kai couldn't help but be amazed at how sturdy it looked. Jong was welcomed by Shanshan and her grandpa, Shang Bo, so he introduced the boys Jang Kai and his classmates to them, and vice versa. He charged Gramps to help him show some of the guys around and explain the fortress rules to them. But Yiming suddenly asked if Jong could distribute some weapons to them so they could contribute in defending the place. Jong shot him the most bombastic side eye known to mankind, while his friend whispered that he shouldn't be so eager and actually try to gain the trust first. However, Jong said they'll get weapons in a few days. Seeing their wounded friend, he ordered them to take him to the medical room for a checkup, but later, Yiming asked his friend why he stopped him from demanding for weapons. He added that they were probably being held under house arrest, but Nerdo said he should keep his mouth shut because Jong rescued them after all. However, Yiming insisted that they knew nothing about Jong's background, and the so-called person who hired him to protect them. Even worse, he claimed to be treating Chong, but that medical room was more secure than maximum security Brazilian prisons. That being said, he felt they should strike first, but Nerdo said that would be an act of treachery. Still, Ziming said he would rather betray his savior first than get betrayed, so he was going to seize control of the fortress and capture Shanshan and Shangbo. Besides, the girl was cute, so they could slurp in and out of her as they desired. His friends were so speechless, listening to him, so when he read the room, he quickly pretended he was just joking. Anyway, Zhang Kai was relieved to hear that he was only joking, and as they turned back, Ziming secretly realized that his friends weren't people he could make plans with. Meanwhile, Shangbo reported that the boys were doing fine, including Chen Chong, who was seriously injured. Zhang thanked him and advised him to rest, because anything could happen. Also, he asked him to keep an eye on the boys, because he felt one of them might end up being a traitor. Much later, Zhang went into his warehouse, and then he visited the systems shop where he purchased the Apocalypse Farmer supply box, the sugar, oil, and protein box, and the armed deterrent box. Each box was opened, and he received 50 corn seeds, some vegetables and sausages, along with over 1,000 rounds of ammunition, all which pleased Zhang. The next morning, some cars drove up to Zhang's house, which belonged to some armed thugs. Their commander instructed them to get rid of Zhang's house, and they immediately moved to destroy its gates. However, after seeing that the gates won't break, they reported this to the boss, and he was frustrated, so he commanded them to bring out their deadly weapons. They removed some bottles of piss and threw them into the fortress together with lighters, and they kept this on until the entrance of the fortress was engulfed in flames. Does this mark the end of everything Zhang strived to build? And will he ever find out which of Zhang Kai's friends was the traitor? Comment, Qi Jing deserves the devil's jingle balls if you'd like to find out in part 2. Leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video and subscribe to the channel for similar content. And as always, thanks for watching.